In the critically acclaimed movie The Truman Show, Jim Carrey played Truman, a man who discovers his entire life from the time he was born has been subject of a reality TV show watched by millions of people. This was just a movie, of course, but what if I told you that this actually happened in real life? Enter Nasubi, a 22-year-old Japanese aspiring comedian who was tortured for 15 months isolated in a room for a twisted reality TV show that he didn't know was being broadcast to millions of people across Japan. The show displayed the real, genuine abuse of a human being, all for the sake of entertainment, and people loved it. The show was so popular in fact that the evil producers decided that they wanted to milk the situation even more, so they decided to kick things up a notch. They transformed the weekly broadcast into a full-blown live stream, letting viewers log in online and watch Nasubi suffer in real time. But the kicker is, they didn't tell Nasubi that his around-the-clock suffering was being turned into a live stream. It all started when Susuno Denpa Shonen held a raffle to find the next contestant for an upcoming show called The Life of Prizes. Tomoaki Hamatsu, nicknamed Nasubi for reasons that will make sense later, ended up winning the lottery and was absolutely thrilled. He saw this as his big break, especially since he was an up-and-coming comedian. He was then taken to a small apartment where, to his surprise, he was asked to strip naked to participate in the game. The challenge? Survive in a small room using only what he won from sweepstakes found in magazines, and in order for him to win the challenge and leave, then the value of the sweepstakes that he had to win had to equal 1 million yen, which at the time was about $8,700 US. For those who don't know what a sweepstake is, it is a type of contest where participants have a chance to win prizes, typically without any requirement to make a purchase or pay a fee to enter. Participants usually enter sweepstakes by submitting their names and contact information through various methods, and winners are chosen at random from a pool of entries, ensuring that all participants have an equal chance of winning, regardless of their skill or effort. So in the case of Nasubi, he was essentially gambling with his life and well-being. They didn't provide him any food. He had to earn every morsel through those sweepstakes. They provided him with water but made it clear, no leaving, no contact with the outside world, and no access to anything he didn't win himself through those sweepstakes. Nasubi thought that he was being filmed for TV, and he was told that the producers would edit the clips and air them every Sunday in 10-minute segments, so he'd pop in periodically entertaining the camera. Nasubi's first big win came a few days later when he secured 12 pots of fiber jelly. Not exactly a feast for a king, but for Nasubi it was a lifesaver because it was his first real food since the challenge began. He was really hungry at this point, so getting some nutrients was a huge relief. Throughout the next month, he kept on winning various items like 1,000 yen, body soap, and canned spaghetti sauce. However, he quickly realized that he lacked a can opener for the spaghetti sauce. Despite many of the prizes being impractical, Nasubi appeared genuinely thankful for each one and celebrated each win. Considering his entire daily routine revolved around earning sweepstakes, the thrill of a knock on the door became his sole source of excitement. Nasubi cherished every knock on his door because it was his only connection to the outside world. He'd get really excited, expecting to win something because why would someone be knocking on the door? So he'd hype himself up. But sometimes it was just cruel, like when the postman knocked only to tell him he needed to put his name on the mailbox, or the time someone delivered ramen to the wrong address, and Nasubi couldn't even enjoy it after catching a whiff of that delicious smell. It was just really sad to witness. Naturally, food was crucial for him to survive and maintain his basic needs during this challenging time. Interestingly, his first attempts at winning something were for clothing items because, well, being naked on camera isn't exactly comfy or warm. He actually tried for an apron first, but luck wasn't on his side. He didn't win it. After a while, things started to look up for Nasubi when he managed to get his hands on 5 kgs of rice, but then the heartbreak set in when he realized he had no way to cook it. He needed to win a pot from a sweepstakes just to cook the rice, so there he was, with 5 kgs of rice and no way to cook it. He got desperate and resorted to eating the rice raw. Unable to continue with that, Nasubi knew he had to find a way to cook it. His first idea was to put the rice into one of those jelly fiber containers, pour in hot water and leave it overnight, hoping it will cook somewhat. But the attempt failed miserably, so he came up with another plan. He put the rice in the fiber jelly container, placed it in hot water next to the gas burner, hoping the heat would cook it indirectly, and it worked. Finally, he had a way to cook and eat the rice he had won. Slowly but surely, Nasubi was chipping away at that million-yen goal, winning more and more prizes. One of his wins was a bicycle, which seemed pretty useless since he couldn't take it outside, but he got creative and turned it into a stationary bike. It was a great way to keep himself stimulated because, honestly, what else was there to do? It's worth noting that some of the seemingly useless things that he won, like the bicycle, weren't entirely worthless. They helped increase the total value of his earnings, bringing him closer to that million-yen goal. Even if he couldn't use them directly, having them in the room was beneficial for completing the challenge. Every win was a step closer to getting out of that tiny, hellish space. As he kept winning more and more prizes, the place started to get really cluttered. There was all sorts of miscellaneous stuff scattered everywhere. He also upgraded the whole cooking setup. Using a pin and a can of sake, he managed to create a pretty efficient cooking apparatus, making it easier to cook rice and even spaghetti. Nasubi submitted 5,748 sweepstakes in the first month alone, so by the end of the second month, he was probably around 11,000 to 12,000 entries in total. Finally, he won his first piece of clothing, used panties from someone named Hitomi-chan, but the underwear didn't fit, which was just another low blow for Nasubi. People started to question the legitimacy of the show. It would have been easy for the producers to intercept the prizes Nasubi won if they were too helpful. For instance, it's odd that the only piece of clothing that he won in 15 months was a pair of panties. That seems unrealistic, and some believers say that there was foul play. There's a theory that the producers intercepted the clothing items to keep him naked for the sake of the show's comedy. In the meantime, he won a stuffed seal, which he named Binasu. He would take it for walks around his small room. It was his only source of companionship, which was truly heartbreaking to see. It's brutal. Eventually, he won 5 pieces of meat, his first real source of protein in months. Up until then, his diet was mostly rice and spaghetti, with trace amounts of protein. Lacking the proper tools, he used a ballpoint pen to cook the meat over an open flame, and getting to eat it made him super happy. Being on the show and suffering like this was huge for him because before this challenge, he wasn't a popular comedian in Japan. He wasn't well off, and this was supposed to be his big break, which is why he was excited to be a part of the show. After a while, Nasubi won a PlayStation game and a special controller for it, but he didn't have a PlayStation or a TV to play it on. It had been about 3 months by this point, and he wasn't even halfway to his million-yen goal. He did win a vacuum cleaner, which let him clean his room for the first time in 3 months. Then he won a TV, which would have been great for some entertainment, but without an antenna, it was useless. It only played static, and he didn't have a PlayStation console to play the game that he won. But he finally won something really useful, a toothbrush and toothpaste. They let him brush his teeth for the first time in 3 months. They even had a doctor come in and check on him. The staff wanted to make sure he wasn't on the brink of death or had contracted any serious disease. The doctor took his vitals and did blood and urine tests, or so they claimed, and they gave him a clean bill of health. Assuming that it's all legitimate and not just theatrics for the show, it still doesn't address the actual torture Nasubi was enduring. Even if his vitals were okay and he didn't have any major health concerns, this was a man deprived of sunlight, socialization, entertainment, and basic human needs for 3 months. So even if the blood work was normal, he was far from okay mentally. Trying to present it as if everything was fine and Nasubi was happy because the doctor said so is even more unsettling. The rice Nasubi had won on the 20th day finally ran out, and he couldn't win any more food, so he resorted to eating dog food, which became his main diet. People also suspect that the producers might have sent him things that he didn't win, like dog food, to further humiliate him and torture him for their audience's sick entertainment. The show became so popular that people eventually found out where Nasubi was being held. Paparazzi and reporters started crowding around the place, so the producers decided to move him to an identical space far away, about 5 hours from the original location. Nasubi thought he had won, but they were just relocating him to continue the game. The move seemed like an actual kidnapping in retrospect. Nasubi, already delirious from months of isolation, hadn't talked to anyone in such a long time. He mentioned that his mind was clouded with anxiety, and he was saying things that didn't make sense. Essentially, he had lost the ability to converse with people and was going insane after 6 months in total isolation. Not only did they relocate Nasubi to a new apartment, but he didn't get all the sweepstakes entries that he sent to the previous address. As if things couldn't get any worse for Nasubi, the production crew played a prank by hiding his only bag of rice to see how he would react. His first win in the new location was a big one, a new desk and a new chair, both relatively expensive. It was a great victory for him. He showed his nails, which had grown outrageously long since he hadn't been able to trim them in about 6 months. He genuinely looked like a prisoner. With this room switch, the producers decided to offer a live web stream alternative, meaning that Nasubi would be watched by millions of people every second of every day. Conveniently, the producers decided not to tell him this in order to make it more entertaining, which is truly sick. They digitally followed Nasubi around with a joystick to censor his genitalia with an eggplant, which is where he got the nickname everyone knows him by, because Nasubi in Japanese means eggplant. It was one of the first actual around-the-clock live streams ever aired, which is depressing and impressive at the same time. The production team decided to surprise Nasubi. They woke him up in the middle of the night with a flashlight. This wasn't new for Nasubi. He had experienced this before. He cautiously asked if he had finally won something. Disappointingly, the answer was no. Without further explanation, they blindfolded him and took him to an undisclosed location. It turned out to be a beach, where they left him completely naked. It was all for a holiday special, but Nasubi still didn't know the full extent of the production. Unaware that he was wearing a microphone, they handed him a bag of rice and a camera, leaving him alone for the night. During his time on the island, Nasubi made a friend. The camera became his sole companion. However, upon returning to his apartment, he discovered the producers had rearranged all of his belongings. The producers claimed that it was a lucky change of scenery, but Nasubi suspected it was just an excuse to tidy up his room. At this point, he had been isolated in that room for 6 months, and he submitted 38,000 sweepstakes by that point, and he was only just halfway to the million-yen goal. During the subsequent months, Nasubi entered almost 20,000 sweepstakes contests. Among his notable wins were watermelon and tickets to Spice Girls, the movie. He was winning food again, and he really celebrated getting some potato chips. But the most important thing that he won was toilet paper. Yes, he survived off no toilet paper for 10 months. Eventually, he got really lucky and won a PlayStation. Now, this is by far the biggest win Nasubi has had so far. That was a pretty expensive prize, especially back then, and it finally gave him real entertainment after 10 months. 8 months earlier, he won a PlayStation game with a special controller, but couldn't play it because he didn't have the console. 6 months ago, he won a TV, so he had everything except the console itself. Finally, he got the last missing piece of the puzzle, the console, and now he could play PlayStation games. This made him the world's first video game live streamer because everything he did was being broadcast live. He paved the way for platforms like Twitch to thrive. He spent 4 straight days playing his PlayStation. After playing so much, he had to ban himself from playing further so he could focus on entering more sweepstakes and getting closer to freedom. So he stopped playing the game and went back to writing entries. He also scored a tent once, but it was so big that he couldn't dance in celebration like usual. Afraid of seeming ungrateful, Nasubi took it down and packed it away. Then on the 335th day, he hit the jackpot with a pricey set of car tires, a 10,000 yen voucher, and finally, a small bag of rice that pushed him just over his 1 million yen goal. After almost a year of constant filling out of sweepstakes entries to win these prizes, Nasubi had finally reached the finish line, but he didn't know it yet. The producers stormed in like a band of no-good thieves in the night, popping party poppers in his face, which scared the living daylights out of him and left him thoroughly confused. Eventually, they explained that he had indeed won. He had made 1 million yen. They gave him his clothes back. It had been 11 months and 1 day, the first time Nasubi had worn clothes in that entire time. When he put them on, he mentioned that they were uncomfortable and itchy, but he was incredibly happy to be finally done with the contest and relieved that he had completed it. But that's not where his story ends, unfortunately. After completing the game, the producers took Nasubi to South Korea, telling him it was a celebration of all his hard work. They went to an amusement park and he ate a lot of great food and had an incredible time. But then things took a dark turn. He was making them far too much money, and the producers weren't done milking this cash cow. They trapped Nasubi in Korea, but this time the goal wasn't 1 million yen. Now he had to enter sweepstakes in Korea, a country where he didn't understand the language. There was dissent on Nasubi's part, despite the appearance that he welcomed the transfer. He was persuaded to keep playing the game by producer Tsuchiya. To him, Tsuchiya was a god, someone who had the power to make him famous. Now though, he truly hated the producer. Later on in his life, he said that when he was pressured to stay in Korea, it was the worst moment of his life. Once again, he was stripped naked and forced to endure the same kind of torture he had endured 335 days prior. So in pursuit of big dreams and driven by the hate of the producer Tsuchiya, he allowed himself to be mercilessly tortured for longer. He had to rely on a Korean to Japanese dictionary to translate. His new goal was to win enough prizes to afford a plane ticket back to Japan. Since Nasubi couldn't speak Korean, he struggled to fill out sweepstakes entries and write down his name and address correctly. He couldn't even read the magazines that listed the contests, and this meant that things looked pretty grim, but Nasubi was determined to learn enough Korean to get himself out of Korea. The obstacles he faced didn't deter him. He had become a sweepstakes master, so he actually completed the challenge in just about 2 months. This upset the producers because he didn't suffer long enough, so they decided to increase the challenge duration and move the goalpost. Instead of just getting a one-way ticket from Korea to Japan in economy class, they now required him to win an additional 9,000 yen in prize winnings to upgrade to business class. They never even told him he initially completed the goal. They just let him keep going until he gathered another 9,000 yen. It seemed they didn't want him to win quickly, or perhaps not at all. The longer he struggled and suffered, the more money they were making. So they framed it as a positive thing, saying, "Look how hard Nasubi's working. We're not going to let him fly economy class. He deserves business class because that's what Nasubi would want." He managed to make the extra 9,000 yen after winning some expensive tea leaves, but once again, they increased the goal without ever telling him. Business class wasn't good enough anymore. Now he needed a first-class ticket, which required an additional 20,000 yen. Surprisingly, Nasubi quickly gathered enough prizes, including a live octopus and a big picture frame, to reach that final rank up to first class. Finally, he got the ticket from Korea to Japan in first class, and it seemed like it was all over. But of course, the story wouldn't be complete without one more final act of cruelty towards Nasubi. They blindfolded him, slapped some noise-cancelling headphones on his ears, and then dragged him onto a stage that looked exactly like the tiny rooms he had been confined to for the last 15 months. On pure instinct, he stripped naked again. It was all he had known for so long. But this time, he had no one to tell him to undress. Then suddenly, the walls fell away, revealing a live audience laughing and applauding him for completing the show. Nasubi was understandably confused, shocked, scared, and utterly bewildered. After enduring months of psychological and physical torture, he couldn't grasp what was happening. It was just another twisted joke from the producers. Millions of viewers watched the finale, along with the studio audience witnessing him standing there completely naked, clueless about why or what was going on. Finally, the life of prizes had come to an end. It was time to unveil Nasubi's grand prize. They gathered Nasubi in front of the audience and started reminiscing about his journey over the last 15 months. They spoke about his growing fan base, his unexpected fame, and thanked him sincerely for his dedication. They also disclosed something shocking to Nasubi. Behind the scenes, they had been monetizing his journey, selling ads, videos, games, and even copies of his personal diary, which had become a bestseller in Japan. It was a lot for Nasubi to take in. To mark the occasion, they served Nasubi a meal right there on stage, letting the audience witness him eat properly for the first time in over a year. Sadly, no one offered him clothes backstage, leaving him to endure this pivotal moment still naked. It was a bizarre ending to an already surreal journey. The show continued with 3 more grueling challenges for other contestants before it was shut down in 2002 due to the extreme hardships contestants endured. Some of these challenges included tasks like hitchhiking across Africa, building a raft on a deserted island and sailing back to Tokyo, and sitting in a dark room where they only received light and food when their favorite baseball team won a game. The impact on Nasubi's life didn't just end with the show. He attempted to resume his regular life after being freed, but a lot had happened to him in the previous year. Nasubi claimed that he didn't know how to communicate with people and that social situations were strange to him for a long time after the show. He found it difficult to look people in the eye, and wearing clothes, which he was never able to win through the sweepstakes, made him feel uncomfortable and sweaty. To everyone else, the show was a big fat laugh at a suffering man, but Nasubi's family was negatively affected by it. During the run of the show, they avoided talking about or doing interviews about the show because they were so traumatized and wanted it to end. Nasubi was worried about his family's acceptance after he was released, because in his view, what he did on the show was shameful. But those were all unwarranted fears, because his family embraced him without reservation. Over time, Nasubi's sense of loneliness subsided, which gave him greater optimism. Although Nasubi had experienced success, it was not the kind he had in mind when he began his career. He was still getting offered the same jobs that required him to be nude or in environments akin to the show. Even as he attempted to rekindle his original passion for comedy and acting, people couldn't see him as anything more than Nasubi. The main producer of the show publicly stated that he has no regrets. He described his aim as creating miracles on film, and with Nasubi, he believed he achieved just that. He did apologize to Nasubi, and Nasubi himself confirmed this, but apologies can't undo 15 months of isolation and mental anguish. Because Nasubi was unaware of the live streams while in solitary confinement, one wonders if he ever thought about suing the producers of the show. He was approached by a number of people looking to help him sue the producers since he had experienced a violation of his human rights, and they advised him that it was very reasonable to file a lawsuit. But Nasubi claimed that the main producer, Tsuchiya, was hugely popular and appearing on his show would make him famous, so he knew what he was doing. Rather than suing people for financial gain and causing more harm than good, Nasubi chose to accept his past and move on. He thought that he could make tremendous improvements in his life by turning his hate and rage into positive energy. Around 2011, Nasubi's hometown of Fukushima saw a nuclear meltdown after 2 significant natural disasters struck the country. He joined other groups in providing relief and began assisting individuals. Because of his fame, people were delighted to see him, and Nasubi himself saw for the first time that he could make positive use of his tragic experience. Nasubi then took it to the next level when he climbed Mount Everest in 2016 after a few failed attempts in order to spread awareness about Fukushima. These days, he's working with charity organizations in Fukushima and across Japan. He enjoys connecting with people in person and helping bring smiles to those in Fukushima. Nasubi's story of torture is a harrowing account of a man who was put in a terrible position by authority figures. Another man who suffered this same fate, just in a different way, was Yoshii Shiratori, who escaped prison 4 times in order to escape the torture from the guards. If you'd like to check out that video on Yoshii Shiratori, click the video on screen now. Thank you for watching the video.